Hi folks, Ryan Honeyman here from Lyft Economy. Today's episode is about Nespresso, perhaps the most hotly debated company in the B Corp community. When Emmy and I started doing this podcast roughly a year ago, there were 3 particular episodes that I was most interested in doing. All 3 of them were either directly or indirectly related to Nespresso becoming a certified B Corp. I'll explain. First was a conversation between David Bronner, CEO of Dr. Bronner's, and Andrew Kasoy, co-founder of B-Lab. David had been frustrated about Nespresso and other multinationals getting certified, and, among other things, David was concerned that the new standards were not going to be strict enough. I wanted to get him and Andrew together to have a respectful conversation, to ideally have them both feel heard, and to try to get them to see each other's point of view. This wasn't just an interesting conceptual idea for an episode. Both David and Andrew had agreed to the interview, and it was calendared to take place in the spring of 2024. Unfortunately, there were a number of last-minute scheduling conflicts due to events outside of our control, and we could never get things aligned to make the interview happen. Given Dr. Bronner's announcement earlier this year, I don't think that episode is ever going to happen at this point, but we were so close. The second episode I was most interested in doing was an interview with Aaron Sahan from Donut Economics. We completed that one in episode number 4, entitled Struggle for the Soul of the B Corp Movement. In that episode, Aaron challenges the predominant narrative in the B Corp community that doing good and doing well always go hand in hand. He argues that while this win-win framing is attractive, he believes it risks sidelining businesses that are willing to face real trade-offs, those that choose purpose even when it might reduce profits. Aaron saw the Nespresso debate as a reflection of this deeper question. Is B Corp primarily for the win-win model of sustainability and commercial performance? Or should it also prioritize companies that have a deep design to put purpose first, even when that means sacrificing returns? Aaron points to companies like Cafe Direct, businesses that don't just add sustainability on the side, but are structured to reinvest profits into social and environmental outcomes. In these models, profit isn't extracted for shareholders, it serves a broader mission. He worries that when large, profit-first multinationals are certified, it confuses consumers and dilutes the value of truly purpose-led businesses. Aaron's central point is that B-Lab needs to be more careful about its messaging so it does not create a false equivalence between those redesigning business around purpose, or the deep design, and those improving within the existing system. He believes trying to hold both under one umbrella does a disservice to both groups. If you are curious, I suggest going back and listening to that episode. It is currently our most listened to episode of all time. So the third and final episode I wanted to record when we started Beyond the B is this one, getting Nespresso on this podcast to get their side of the story. And we didn't just get a PR person. We got Lucy Bai, the sustainability manager for Nespresso US, who led their B Corp certification process in 2021 and 2022, and is currently leading their B Corp recertification process. So why are we even talking to Nespresso? Because almost everyone has an opinion about Nespresso, but I would bet that very few people have ever spoken with them. That's what we do on this podcast. We seek out and lean into controversial issues. I would understand if some B Corps who are listening felt like this interview is unfairly giving Nespresso a platform. We get it. Emmy and I are not here to pretend that Nespresso's record is all rainbows and unicorns. There are real and legitimate concerns about single-use coffee pods, human rights in the supply chain, profit allocation to shareholders, whether B Corp certification can materially change multinational behaviors, and a variety of other hot-button issues. And we appreciate Aaron Sahan's thoughtful and respectful critiques. However, many commentators inside and outside the B Corp community have been less generous to Nespresso. Emmy and I are here to say that canceling Nespresso, putting them into the bucket of nothing they ever do is good enough and writing them off forever, is not the most effective approach to building an economy that works for all life. if you listen to our episode with Jenny Morgan on cancel culture and climate, which I highly recommend, she said that when we feel like canceling someone, we should ask ourselves a number of questions. For example, we should ask ourselves, am I open to questioning my beliefs, or am I operating from a position of certainty? Jenny said that questioning one's own certainty and embracing doubt is essential for cultivating empathy, reducing the judgments we place on others, and promoting more respectful interactions. It encourages intellectual humility and a willingness to engage in genuine dialogue. I think part of the fear of listening to someone we disagree with, perhaps someone from Nespresso, is that we might actually generate empathy or learn something new, or connect with them in a way that forces us to reconsider our own position, and that messes with our identity. I know from personal experience that it is much more comfortable for me to be right and for other people to be wrong. Just ask my wife. If we have empathy for the other, we can start to feel disoriented and lose our sense of self. Often, it is more about us and our attachment to a story about who we are than it is about the other person. One example is Dr. Bronner's big complaint about pulling out of the B Corp community was that B Lab does not require third-party eco-social certification of supply chains. Well, Nespresso has over 50% of its supply chain third-party eco-social certified via a combination of Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance certification. Is that perfect? No. Could it be higher? Sure. But writing them off completely does a disservice. They are also doing some pretty innovative things around regenerative agriculture, carbon insetting, agroforestry, and biodiversity. Here is a hypothetical. We all know that everyone in the B Corp community wants to create an economy that works for the benefit of all life. What if allowing multinationals to certify actually helps us get there, and excluding them would not? I would question anyone who believes that keeping the community small and ultra-high impact is definitively, without a doubt, the best way to create the best long-term outcomes for people and planet. I just don't think we can be that certain. Vincent Stanley from Patagonia said something interesting to me, which is, I don't believe that companies are becoming B Corps in order to greenwash. There are much easier ways to greenwash than the effort and resources it takes to become a B Corp and remain certified. I couldn't agree more. So let's talk about the interview itself. This interview is neither an antagonistic set of gotcha questions to prove Nespresso is bad, nor is it a start-to-finish set of easy softballs that Lucy can knock out of the park. We strive for a balance of genuine curiosity about the things Nespresso is doing well and tough but fair questions about places where there is concern. During the first half of our interview, Lucy gives us an inside look at Nespresso's B Corp certification journey, what the process actually looked like for a multinational, how they're preparing for the new standards, and what social and environmental commitments they are making. In the last half of the episode, we get into some of the tougher questions around Nespresso's impact and how they allocate their resources. This is also not necessarily the only interview we will do with Nespresso. If there are balanced and respectful follow-up questions you believe we should ask them, email us at beyond@lifteconomy.com and we can get them to Lucy and her team, either to answer via email or to potentially invite back on for a follow-up conversation. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode.
Welcome to Beyond the B, an ongoing dialogue about the past, present, and future of the B Corp movement. Co-hosts Emmy Allison and Ryan Honeyman facilitate an open and honest conversation about the B Corp movement, advise companies on how to increase their impact, and provide a deep dive into the new B Corp standards that are shaping our community.
I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy, and I'm joined by my colleague and co-host, Emmy Allison. Emmy, welcome back to the show.
Hey.
And today we're excited because we have a special guest. We have Lucy Bai from Nespresso. So Lucy is currently the sustainability manager for Nespresso US, based in New York City. She works cross-functionally to execute a myriad of social and environmental programs within the company. More specifically, she manages net zero initiatives in the US and oversees sustainability governance across the US and Canada. Previous to her current role, Lucy worked for Ernst & Young on business process improvements and financial audits for over 12 years. She's a certified internal auditor awarded by the Institute of Internal Auditors. She earned her Bachelor's of Science in Accounting from Binghamton University and Master's in Sustainability Management from Columbia University. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan and Amy. Glad to be here.
So, Lucy, let's start off with if you could tell us a bit about your background. I noticed I'm interested in this financial audits and then how you're doing sustainability now. So tell us a bit about your background before you first got involved in the B Corp movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So from a background perspective, I'm going to go back a little bit further than maybe just from the career perspective. So I grew up in Changchun, China, which is in further northern part. It is a small city, but still roughly the size of New York City comparatively when we say small in China. And growing up in the 90s there, sustainability and the way to conserve resource is very ingrained to our day-to-day living. There's no name for it. There's no buzzword for it. It's just simply the way we live because there's only so much resource available from water, energy perspective. The grid is not as advanced as it is today now. So we save energy, we save water, we always reuse water. So that's really just like my upbringing. My grandparents, they even unplugged the TV cable when the TV is not in use for most part of the day to conserve energy that way. That's just our normal way of living. And then also at that time, China's transitioning into a market economy, right? Opening up the doors since Nixon's visit. So really opening up trade with Western markets. And then the market economy is beginning to drive a lot of the forces behind it, where you see so many really good, honest business people, but at the same time, they're beginning to be people to try to find shortcuts and then doing business sometimes in an irresponsible way. So seeing that, growing up in that environment, you have the two worlds colliding and that family value being instilled in me is just always doing the right thing and being responsible. So then fast forward to then going through my college choices. At that time, I'm dating myself a little bit now, but, the Enron, Arthur Andersen, all that is happening and really bringing down the financial systems and the reporting, the transparency, the trust in the financial systems and the financial reporting aspect, right? And then shortly after that, ushered in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that requiring business to be responsible in its reporting through risk assessment, governance. Now you're beginning to hear very similar words to what we typically talk about in a B Corp certification environment, right? The company is responsible in its accurate financial reporting, the governance structure that supports that accuracy, right? And then to hold public companies really accountable in that. So through my studies really got me into the world of finance and accounting and then led me on the path to becoming certified internal audit, working at Ernst & Young to hold companies accountable. So really at that point where companies are beginning to be punishable under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, that they're punishable with corruption and fraud, that then for me is to say, okay, like this is how you hold companies accountable from a financial reporting perspective and not looking that and comparing that to B Corp, even the financial aspect is to say, are you accurately claiming what you're financially reporting? Are you not lying about your assets and liabilities and all that? But at the same time, when you look at that from a B Corp perspective, you're looking at not just, are you not lying as a company that we often characterize with this human way of talking about companies, but how are you proving your character as a company, right? As an individual, as a company. So it's really like taking that to the next level of proving your character of who you are. Are you doing what you're saying you're doing? Are you holding your principles? What are your principles? So I really think that looking back with 2020, that I didn't realize at the time that would be my career trajectory, but here I am now, working for a certified B corporation and ushering in our certification at the onset back in 2022.
Wow, thanks for that context. I actually lived in China for 6 months in like 2006. I was an English teacher.
Oh,
我是英语老师. I can
there
still
you
remember
go.
my little bit of Chinese.
很不错，发音很不错。
很好.
Good pronunciation. Yes.
Well, I think I'll just set the stage and then I'm going to have Emmy jump in with some questions. So people might be asking, why are we having this interview? And Emmy and I talked about it for a while, and we think it's important to talk to you and learn more about Nespresso. A lot of people, I feel like, have opinions about Nespresso, but like almost no one actually knows Nespresso or has like heard them talk, like heard your side of the story. And so part of this podcast is like having those conversations that are a little bit on the edge of what B Corps, we can often be very self-congratulatory, like, yeah, we're business for good. Everything's so positive, but like, we don't want to talk about maybe some of the issues that are a little more juicy. And so I really appreciate you for coming on and telling us about what you're up to in Nespresso and being willing to go into some of these questions that folks have.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess for a lot of listeners who may not know as a company what we do, so Nespresso is both a coffee company and a machine company. I think a lot of people know about our machines, our systems, more so than knowing that we're also a company. We source coffees directly across from farmers we have direct relationships with across the globe, across all those Arabica, Robusta regions globally. So we are multinational. And I believe we're about I want to say like about 40 markets or so across the globe that we have presence in. So yeah, we're sizable, I guess.
Yeah, that's really helpful context. Thanks so much for sharing. Could you actually give us a little backstory behind Nespresso getting B Corp certified? I love that you sort of like had the context and the backdrop of having companies just be a lot more responsible, and like the accountability mechanisms for corporations have been increasing in recent decades. And I love that you compared that against the B Corp certification. It sounds like that's some of the motivation, but how long had Nespresso been working on B Corp certification, and what shifted to make it possible for Nespresso to go that route?
For Nespresso, I believe we have submitted. So I joined in July 2021. It was already submitted before that. And judging by this round of recertification timeframe, that would be in Q1 of 2021 that we have submitted, not just the questions, but the substantiations as well. And the audit itself took place from July through August. It was multiple weeks, multiple interviews, rounds of interviews, and then follow-ups from documentation that are submitted, a lot of follow-up with HR-related questions, because for our HR team, also this type of audit to peering into the nitty-gritty, providing certain data, employee information type of things, they need to really, check to make sure that they're okay to provide these type of information. It's not something that is typically asked outside of our standard financial audits as well as internal audits. So there's a new auditing body. So really just kind of like testing the muscle memories there to be able to meet what the auditor's looking for. And then through final certification, I believe we're still going back and forth with the B Lab on some of those final points up until the month of certification. And I believe we finally concluded, it probably took us about a full year, end to end from when it was submitted, questions and evidence submitted, all the way through finalizing some of those finer review points, and to be able to accredit us those points on those finer details. So at least 12-month process just for that last mile, essentially.
That's quite a wild time to jump into the process. It sounds like you joined like the year before, or like in the year before that you're submitting for certification. And that's like crash course in B Corp certification. But I think it might be helpful a little bit for listeners. I think Ryan and I have touched on this before, but to just like give a higher level overview of how a verification process is a little bit different for a company like Nespresso than it is for probably the majority of the B Corp community, in just that Usually when a company is submitting for B Corp certification, an initial certification is often much more rigorous than recertification. A lot of times recertification is like just sort of like verifying things that they already sort of know. But initial certification is quite an undertaking. And for a company of Nespresso's size, and I should say smaller companies, they have something like 10% of their impact assessment get selected for verification. So you're submitting hundreds of questions to B Lab, and B Lab selects a certain percentage of that assessment to verify. And so smaller companies are getting something like 10% of the assessment selected for verification. But a company like Nespresso is getting as much as like 60% of the assessment selected for verification. And that means that you're going into each individual question and having to provide documentation for every single answer option that you selected. And the analyst is looking at your documentation and saying, hey, great, this is what we're looking for. We're going to verify this, or this is not what we're looking for. Do you have something else? And if you don't, we're going to deselect it. Because Nespresso is a multinational and it's a certain amount of revenue and across a certain number of markets, B Lab, the rigor for the verification is much higher.
Let's move to you get certified. So internally, like you're like, okay, yes, put on all this work. What was your experience of the reception from, the B Corp community? And did you expect like, hey, is this going to be fully positive received? Or like, what were you sort of hoping going into it? And then like, what did you experience?
Yeah, I think across the organization, from an employee perspective, everyone was super excited. You can just see everybody's eyes light up, everybody sit up a little bit straighter, listening to every time we talk about B Corp, and then it really strikes as some of the passions that our employees have as well, right? These are not just topic pertaining to the business. It matters to them on a personal level. It matters to them that Nespresso has put so much energy by, being a business as a force for good. Of course, that's a catchphrase that's capturing everything that we do, but I think it just creates a lot of energy, a lot of kind of support from the employees. I'm very excited to hear about this. And from my personal experience, I attended the B Corp retreat in Philadelphia. That was the first one that I attended, end of 2022, I believe. And yeah, we were so welcomed by the B Lab community, by B Lab, by other B Corp. They're very excited to hear that Nespresso. They're like, wow, you guys are big national. Tell me, same questions that you have. Tell me about your certification process. That must have been a big lift for your company, judging, just going from their experience. So, in many instances that I experienced, we walked in with a lot of open arms, and it also allowed us to connect with many other B Corp, in which now we are bringing them into our offices to talk about how they're improving on certain programs, how they're thinking about certain issues, what are some of the initiatives that they're putting in place, what challenges they're facing, how are they overcoming them, and be able to cross-share that and continue to drive at that improvement across the board.
In terms of like the like sort of more negative pushback, there was like this like open letter from, I think it was Fair World Project, saying like, why are we letting Nespresso in? This is like bad for B Corps, or like, so there was like some negative sort of news. And was that surprising, or like, how was that experience for you and your team to sort of have that?
Yeah, I mean, it is, you always want to know that you're welcome all the way through and through. But I think from my perspective, it's somewhat expected because we are probably one of the first multinational, and B Corp is started from a community that's more grassroots. You have a lot of these companies where they built their business foundations built on B Corp, whereas we adopted the B Corp requirements and then tried to measure ourselves against that, right? Look at kind of retrospectively look at our practice and say, do we meet these set of standards? Versus a lot of companies say, we want to build a company and this is standard and we're going to build a business around these set of standards. It's two different approach to B Corp. And both approaches okay. Like there are many companies that are in these two camps, right? I think being that we're the first multinational, of course, that rings a different bell for some people. But I would say that honestly, we're still very proud to be part of this organization. We see this work as really important. It holds us to a certain standards. It is here to stay. We want to push ourselves even to do even better day after day. And then we welcome these feedback. We want to hear what companies have to say. And we want to be able to share some of the good things that we have done. Maybe some things that are just not widely talked about, because Nespresso, oftentimes we do a lot of things, a lot of initiatives. We didn't do it for marketing purposes. We do it for just simply the right thing to do as a business practice. Our regenerative agriculture practices, AAA program, our circularity program, our capsule recycling, curbside recycling. So a lot of these things already exist before we even start talking about B Corp. So of course, to be able to validate it by the certification itself was a big achievement, feeling very, very validated from our side that we're all doing the right thing. And I want to say that at the end of the day, that we look forward to do more in the best way possible that is also authentic to who we are as a business.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I think it's worth noting that I'm glad that you sort of pointed out there's like a grassroots element, like type vibe and mentality in the B Corp movement. There are quite a few like original B Corps that are still in the community today. And what the B Corp movement looked like in 2007 it's very different than what it looks like today. And we've been constantly having this conversation. I think when Nespresso got certified, it touched on some similar feelings in the community as when Ben and Jerry's first got certified, where folks were like, how are we letting a different kind of multinational organization into the community? And I think that Ben & Jerry's has been such a delightful member of the community since they have been B Corp certified. But I think it's a really interesting conversation that sort of like B Corp certification is encouraging a lot of different companies to codify and formalize their impact and then have built-in framework that where companies can improve over time. And there are really amazing community members out there. And the framework, I think, really does speak for itself.
If I may add, in terms of what B Corp, the movement is, right? In order to create a movement, you need it at scale. You need it to reach a certain scale to turn a different economic tide than one that's already established. And we're hoping, and it's my honest hope, joining Nespresso, and very proudly that the company that I work for is using its reach and its scalability to help with that movement, right? And one of the proudest thing I want to say for Nespresso that I've seen so far is that we work with over 150,000 farmers across the globe through our AAA program. Again, AAA program is not of marketing, as you already tell it. It's not really a very good marketing tag phrase, but this program really champions the livelihood of the farmers, making sure that they are being paid a living income, which resonates with one of the criteria that B Corp is looking at. And then also in looking at the sustainability practices to be able to bring that quality cup of coffee. So at the end of the day, the product that Nespresso is putting out on the market, despite what we say from a marketing perspective, is backed by not just sustainable farming practices, but trying to really implement regenerative farming practices. We're trying to grow that. We're trying to scale that. And then we're also trying to ensure that the farmers are being paid a living wage and looking at expanding some of the pension programs, one of the first pension programs in the farming community, and trying to expand that program into other regions as well, starting in Colombia. We're now in Indonesia, trying to bring to different markets. So I think that scalability from a movement perspective could truly bring value to that. And I'm not just saying that because, I'm here speaking for Nespresso. It is truly what I believe in, that you have to be able to reach a certain tipping point in order for all others to begin to follow and to get behind this movement.
Yeah. I want to jump into some of your sustainability highlights because I think it's really important. And I just want to say that there's a few things that are working against Nespresso that I think people like grasp onto, which is The coffee pods are it's just like a hard thing for people to wrap their head around sustainability wise. And then I think it's a challenge for any multinational and any subsidiary of a multinational, because it's just in the past, there's been abuses and things where like a multinational will come in and like do something or greenwash or whatever. And so people are just like, they're like really sensitive. They're like, I don't want this thing that I care about to be like affected. And I want to acknowledge people who feel that way and like know that, yes, in the past, I don't want to excuse like any past sort of things that have happened with anything with Nestle or Nespresso. But I also think it's not necessarily fair to then, for like the rest of time looking forward, say that like Nespresso can never do these things, which are actually pretty innovative and like are doing cool things. Like carbon insetting. I don't even know how many people listening to this know that much about carbon insetting. And like you said, like regenerative agriculture. So I do think it's like you're sort of stuck a little bit between a rock and a hard place with like, yeah, we're trying to make coffee pods better. And we do operate in this environment where there have been past things that people have been frustrated about. And we're also trying to do better. And I think what we're trying to do with this podcast is also like, let's not just put Nespresso completely in a bucket where it's like, oh, they can never sort of be like a good business or like doing positive things, because I do think you are doing a lot of good things. So maybe, I don't know if you want to respond to that, or if you want to talk about regenerative agriculture or the carbon insetting, because I think those are important things that you're working on too.
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk about all those things as well, Ryan. And I think to respond to your statement, first and foremost, is that, well, first of all, thank you for acknowledging all the work that Nespresso is looking to do, and that people may or may not know about because they heard one thing, they just automatically put us into one camp. So thank you for acknowledging that. And then maybe then I might ask for many of the audience who may feel that way originally about us is to at least listen to us with an open mind. When we receive feedback from the B Corp, we try to also maintain that open mind, because I think that's the only way to make things constructive, to be able to build on foundations that we have built, to build on each other's successes, because otherwise we are just continuously being in the space we're tearing each other down. And that's no way to build a movement behind. And I don't believe that is what B Corp, the intent of B Corp and B Lab is. And I think it is to use our collective intelligence, our collective effort to build towards a future in which we want to see. And we can all contribute, not to be trite or anything, but I think like you want to be what you envision, right? So you work towards that. And then Nespresso very much follows that in a many sense from our entire value chain perspective. So some of the couple of things that you touched upon is our main sustainability pillars, from how we source, how we manufacture, and what happens from an end of life perspective. A lot of energy and work and effort goes into that. From how we source, from a regenerative agriculture. So our AAA program, and I'll just explain that in a couple of short sentences. It is a program built for the farmers, where right now 93% of our farmers are evaluated against this program, making sure that they're being paid a living wage, that they earn a living wage through the coffee that they produce. It meets certain quality criteria, and then also meets certain farming practices that try to place soil health at the forefront of it, biodiversity, water. Those are some of the key tenets from a regenerative agriculture perspective. And then we partner with Rainforest Alliance, because at the end of the day, it is a collective action, right? UN SDG number 17, collective action, partnership, right? So we also partner with people who are experts in this, such as Rainforest Alliance, to look at various regenerative agriculture practices and develop a set of clear guideline and scorecard to evaluate the farms against. And then the goal is to say this is how you progress to further expand your regenerative agriculture practices, because we cannot continue this extractive nature of the way of doing business. We have to restore the land that we produce from, right? And then From a manufacturing perspective, we source 100% renewable energy, solar-powered manufacturing facilities in Switzerland. And then from a end-of-life perspective, for the US alone, not only do we have dedicated recycling sites, we have over 88,000 collection points across the countries to give our customers access to drop off their used capsules. We also work with New York City, opened and made investment to install equipment to allow not just to capture Nespresso capsules, but all small format non-ferrous metals in New York City. So that those non-ferrous metals, those small metals that are less than 2 inches, no longer go to landfill. It's capturing all of that. So, and then we continue to explore pathways with other municipalities across the U.S. that will allow consumers to not drop off, but just drop their capsules in their recycling bins to give them an easier pathway when they want to recycle their capsules, and encourage, have campaigns and almost PSAs to encourage that set of behaviors. So those are kind of, in a nutshell, some of the kind of like key pillars and initiatives that, we at Nespresso are currently working on.
Thank you, Lucy. One of the questions we had posed to you is if you had a wish list for sustainability initiatives that need more focus or funding, do you have like a top 3? Like, here's what I would do if I had this sort of unlimited resources to be more, to direct towards one of these projects?
Yeah, love a good shopping list question. I think one of the first things that is funding for decarbonization, not just for the coffee sector itself, but it is truly important. And I don't have to say so much. I don't want to belabor the point to this audience that it is not a myth, unlike what's some of the communications being out there, but it is so truly important that we put as much energy as we can in decarbonization as we can. I think some of the historically, this type of investments compared to the escalating wars that would be detrimental to countries, if those are like real risk, so is climate risk. And to be able to put funding towards that and then decarbonize on a global scale, I think that's so critical for not just our sustainability pillar, but everyone's, right? And then the other thing is that to be able to scale the recycling solutions for the US especially, we have a lot of land. So the practice in the past has always been landfilling, throwing away, this throwaway culture, versus how do you reuse, upcycle? How do you just simply, first and foremost, reduce, right? If you think about the hierarchy, to avoid, right? So, but then ultimately is to put more funding in the recycling systems so that we rescue more materials from landfill, we minimize landfill. That also contributes to decarbonization from a methane release perspective. And then also, last but not the least, I want to say, to be able to bring access to not just underserved communities, but all communities about understanding of the food system, where it comes from. We have a NYU Sustainability Leadership Program at Nespresso, where every year from US, Canada, and Mexico, we send a selected set of individuals through our application process to our farms, to Nespresso coffee farms, to learn about the challenges they face, what climate change means for them, the level of difficulties that they have to overcome to put in regenerative agriculture practices, what that means for them from an economic perspective, to have economic resilience by putting in regen ag practices. So having our eyes open to that and have a more in-depth understanding truly hits home for us, and then changes who you are as an individual, changes your practices. So if these kind of opportunities could be made available to more individuals from school age and onwards, I think that would truly change how we view the world, our consumption practices, our ability to conserve, and then bring back to how I was raised, that way of conservation type of living, being mindful of not consuming more resources than you need, is then become embedded. Then we no longer need to talk about sustainability as a separate thing. If it's just core of who you are, it's part of how you practice, how you do business, how you interact with each other and be in between nations. So that's my dream, my nirvana dream. So
I appreciate that. And I love that. I feel like there are more and more public schools, at least in the US, that are formally incorporating like food systems education for K through 12 students. It's just like so integral. There's so many of us that don't understand where our food comes from and how it gets to our tables and the grocery stores. So I really appreciate that last shopping list, wish list. I'm curious to know if Nespresso is having a profitable year. Is there flexibility to prioritize the ecological investments or the direct support for farmers that you're talking about? How do those sort of like priorities work on an annual basis? Or do those profits go to the sort of usual places? How do those decisions get made about how to invest?
Yeah. So from an investment perspective, there are many things that Nespresso invests in. Circularity is one of those I mentioned earlier, and then the R&D related to that, to have refurbished program, establishing vendor, and then building out that network to bring back our machines. As I mentioned earlier, Nespresso is also a machine company, right? To be able to bring back those machines so that they don't fall out of the cycle. And then on the farmer side, so I believe in 2023, we made over 43 million Swiss francs of technical assistance to the farmers. So what that means is that we have over 600 agronomists, some part of Nespresso that work for Nespresso or contract with Nespresso. So these agronomists provide those technical training to the farmers. And then also through that investment, Nespresso helped them to find bio-based fertilizers, compost, establishing compost system, because in some of the countries, despite compost becoming more of a buzzword here in the US, it does not quite exist, especially in some of these coffee regions, right? It's not part of their common practice to be able to set up those facilities and then really then put in some R&D into Regen Act, because that is still being, a lot of the practices, ancient way of agriculture is still being brought back as we speak, because for thousands of years we've been tilling, right? We're trying to eliminate the weed, thinking it's competing against the crops. So trying to find more of those symbiotic relationships between plant species and what helps with the coffee plants. So that's where all the investments are going into. So we really try to put, I guess, money where our mouth is when it comes to being able to source our coffee sustainably.
What does the decision-making process look like to invest more across the ESG goals? Like, is it something where, you have targets and ideally, you're meeting those targets and there's like, a little bit more budget to be able to invest in farmers or to be able to invest in circularity? Like, what is the process like for you to advocate, I guess, for being able to better meet those goals? How are these different metrics and performance and goals getting prioritized based on the financial performance, I suppose, of the company?
Yeah, maybe another way of answering this is that our sustainability initiatives are not going to be deprioritized because our financial performances, right? Because then you can also have a very bad year, and then you look at, what are we going to cut? We start by saying, well, what travels can we cut? What travels can we cut? How are we more efficiently use our media dollars, which is, as you can imagine, that's a big budget for any company. How are we being more efficient with some of our larger contracts with larger other multinationals, looking across our logistics network? What are we doing there, right? But what we're not defunding is these key sustainability programs. We're not defunding our recycling initiatives. We are not defunding the goal, the commitment, the public commitment that we made to pay our farmers those, fair trade, living wage reference price, right? So that is because at the end of the day, without those, we wouldn't have a company to speak with. So so maybe that's a better way of answering question as to, where does the priority stand?
I appreciate that. That's helpful context.
So some have argued that Nespresso mainly focuses on solutions and investments that mitigate their own risks around supply chain security. So like where this aligns with farmer and ecological concerns and interests, this would get the green light. But the ultimate priority is solving the risks that potentially undermine the commercial or like shareholder interests. Do you think this is like a fair assessment?
I think to say, are we doing these things because we authentically believe in the cause, or are we doing these things because it serves our commercial interests? Can you truly operate in a world that one does not impact the other, right? When you positively impact the people on the planet, that is good for business. And then if you want your business as a force for good, you have to then reverse think about your impact to the people on the planet. And I think that these all complement each other. For example, I think one is a stretch for a lot of people. A perfect example is when we say birds. Now, what do birds have anything to do with coffee? At the forefront, probably nothing off the top of your head. However, Baltimore Oriole, Baltimore, same name for the baseball team in Baltimore, for those baseball fans out there. They love coffee regions because coffees thrive under shade-grown trees. They love these shade-grown trees in the coffee regions. And because that also helps you grow the coffee, a lot of Nespresso coffee farms are AAA farms. When you go there, if you ever get to experience that, you see there are a lot of different types of trees at different heights, different size of canopies exist. And then we also work with Pure Projet, which is a agroforestry nonprofit organization, to plant the right trees, looking at the different species, local native species that are right for the region to repopulate these areas with trees, right, with shade grown. So then we partner with, so Cornell said, wait a minute, we are trying to study our biodiversity, and they have a biodiversity index. Can we use your farms as our study basis to understand how has this type of agricultural practice helped to increase biodiversity using birds as an index, as a species index? Because when you bring birds back, there tend to be other organisms that then follow. And then also because of the birds that do live here feeds on some of the insects that are available, and you minimize your pesticides use, right? So I think that creates a cycle, a regenerative cycle, in which that we all get to benefit. The farmer gets to benefit because they don't have to pay as much money to pesticides, and we get quality coffee. And from a conservation perspective, they see an abundance of bird species. And I believe Cornell is going to, if not already, publishing a report from its study since 2001, tracking some of the areas in Colombia to see the increase in direct correlation in these species growing. So is it obvious to us right off the cuff? No, not necessarily. Was it a theory at one point? Obviously. But now, years later, through following these farms from 2013 until now, we see this positive impact. So yeah, I think that's really almost like a poster child case to say, are you authentic in what you do, or or are you doing these things because you want to drive out core business earnings? Because I really don't think that if we really want to truly be a business as a force for good, we cannot bifurcate those things. We have to look at them in conjunction.
That's a great example. I love that. I love the birds. And I've also heard that you've done some stuff around with regenerative agriculture, like training some of the coffee farmers in like bee pollinator and like honey production, right? So it's like giving farmers another income stream, training on like, how to create pollinator habitat. And like, it does increase the like productivity of the farm, but it's also like beneficial for nature. I don't know if you want to speak at all to that initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. We do work with farmers and try to train them to become beekeepers as well. It's just one of those many of the examples we don't typically always talk about. But last year, for the first time, we launched honey as a product in the US market to drive the conversation, because oftentimes you only have limited amount of time with your customers. And now you really get the customers to be more curious as to like, what do you mean? Why do you sell bees? What does it mean for, like, why do you have bees, honey in your product line? So we've been partnering with UB in certain coffee growing regions to pilot to understand whether if the bee has a positive impact on Arabica beans and Robusta beans. These are the two main coffee varieties. And also working with Pure to plant some of the fruit trees. So that way through beekeeping, through having fruit trees, these are the different avenues in which farmers can have another form of income complementing the coffee income that they already have. So once again, it is to be able to provide that economic resilience for the farmers and finding them alternative revenue streams through working with us.
I appreciate your sharing about the bees because the bees are really critical to our ecosystems, and supporting the bees supports a lot of other parts of our food systems. Can you tell us a little bit about how Nespresso is preparing for the new B Corp standards? I know you're deep in the research process right now, which I'm sure takes up the majority of your time and energy. But have y'all started thinking about that? Have you started to implement any of those? How much have you been sort of trying to incorporate those?
Yeah, definitely. So as a part of recertification, and I'll talk a little bit about also just the US market, US and Canada. What may be different for many other B Corp is that when we are certifying Nespresso, we're not just looking at what individual markets are doing. They also looking at us from a zone perspective. So basically what that means is that US and Canada are scored together. If we do one thing, Canada does not, that means we simply won't get that point because there's that 80% rule requirement from BLAB, right? And that then allows us or encourages us, however, which word that you want to use, to make sure that we're holding each other accountable, to poke at each other, say, hey, how are you doing? Status check, right? Each other to say, how are you doing with this initiative, that program? Have you put a signage, gender neutral signage on your bathrooms yet? Sometimes it is part of what we do, but not necessarily formalizing a policy. Sometimes it's a policy in place, but also making sure that you're tracking the actions behind these policies. If you have a volunteering policy, are you tracking your volunteering metrics, so on and so forth? How many organizations, how many hours, what is the participation rate? So holding each other accountable in that sense. So we're scored together as a zone. And then every single zone have coordinators to look at all those initiatives across the board, and at the global level, looking at all of these collectively to say every single year, we also do our internal self-check so that we don't leave it all to the last minute to say, well, last year you said you had this program. This year I see your data's missing, or I don't see it. Like, where is that? Are you just missing a data point, or you just misanswered that question, so on and so forth? Or, oh, I see you have a big decrease in your energy consumption. What is that driven by? What is the root cause of that? Can you help to explain that? Can we truly claim those things? So that's kind of the process we're going through right now as the recertification, compared not just to when we were certified, but compared to our internal performance year over year as well. And also, Ryan, following your show has been really helpful and understanding what other companies are doing, getting themselves ready for the certification. So thinking about how we can lean into some of those things that others have already thought about, are doing. So not to just start from zero, but just continue to build on that momentum that others have created as well. So yeah, multiple inputs, multiple alignments.
What's your favorite podcast episodes, out of curiosity?
Oh, yeah. I think the one that resonated with me the most is about the one about circularity, because we're very much on that path to look at our refurbished model, how to extend that even further, expand into other SKUs. How do we address the out of stock because it got so popular, it got bought out, or what have not? So then how do you then try to rescue? Where are we? Where else can we rescue more machines that could be potentially designated for destruction, to be scrapped and recycled? So we want to rescue those parts to bring more into the fold. So yeah, that really, really resonated with me, only because I was in the thick of designing that, working on that with our extended team.
Cool. I think we're going to wrap this up, but a few closing questions. What do you need right now, and how can listeners support your work?
Yeah, so if you are an Nespresso customer, please recycle your capsules. And if you live in New York City, you may just put that directly in the blue bin. And then if you're in Jersey City low-rise buildings, you begin to see how complicated this problem becomes. You may also put that in your blue bins. And as look out for news this year and next year as we try to move into more curbside solutions across the US. Yeah, and then if you're looking to purchase a machine, be on the lookout of refurbished stocks that we'll have available through our boutiques and our e-com, Nespresso.com sales channel. So
Cool. Sorry. So listeners can buy or consumers can buy refurbished machines. They can go check their local store, their local Nespresso store, or if they're like currently available on the website.
correct. Yeah.
Awesome. And then how can we stay tuned into Nespresso happenings? How can we learn more about the latest initiatives?
Yeah, so we will be releasing, from a sustainability side, we will be releasing the 2024 Progress Positive Cup Report. So stay tuned on those news. Nespresso.com is generally your go-to for anything news related for Nespresso. And then you can follow us on social media through Meta, through Instagram for some of our latest news, latest releases, and then our Positive Cup 2024 Progress report will be available on our website.
Awesome. Lucy, thank you so much for your time. This has been a lovely conversation. I really appreciate your candor and your honesty and your enthusiasm for the B Corp certification and the B Corp movement. It's been such a treat to have you on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. And it truly is an honor to be speaking on your podcast, considering there's so many prominent sustainability professionals that you have brought onto this show. And I wish you all the success for this show. I'm an avid listener. I really appreciate all the insights and news that you bring to this audience space as well.
Thanks so much.
And thank you, Lucy, for being in the hot seat. You know, it's not easy to answer some of these questions. And yeah, I appreciate your willingness to not be like, I'm going to plead the fifth on that one. You're like, I'm going to ask it. But thank you. Hey, Beyond the Bee listeners. If you're looking for even more inspiring conversations with leaders on the front lines of our movement towards just futures, be sure to subscribe to Next Economy Now, produced by the team at Lift Economy. Next Economy Now broadens the focus beyond the B Corp movement to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, equitable, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Check out our latest episodes at lifteconomy.com/podcast. You can subscribe to Next Economy Now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.